The next day, John left his apartment and headed to a forest. He took out a map, held it with both hands, and while examining it, began to question which direction was the correct one. He wasn't sure if he had gotten lost again. At that moment, someone shouted loudly for help. John, who was trying to find his way, turned around with a confused look and began to wonder who was shouting. Behind him, there was a giant tree lying on the ground, and beside it was a sword. At the top of the tree, a man with white hair was clinging to a branch, calling for help because he was afraid of heights. John turned around, looked up, and upon seeing the man, remained silent for a moment, deep in thought. He decided to help him. John extended his hand and used an ability called Growth of All Things, Vine. Several branches emerged from the ground and advanced toward the man. Just as the man let go of the trunk and began to fall, the branches wrapped around his body, preventing him from hitting the ground. A few seconds later, the man safely landed on the ground. He placed both hands and knees on the ground, panting heavily, and explained to John that he had been terrified. He had climbed the tree to save a bird's nest, thinking it wasn't too high, but once he reached the top, he realized how high it actually was. John approached him, looking at him with a drop of sweat falling from his cheek. He was somewhat confused, seeing that the man was afraid of heights yet still decided to climb the tree to save a bird's nest. He wondered if the man was an idiot. The man stood up, he was older, and extended his hand toward John. With a pleasant expression, he thanked John for saving him and asked what he wanted in return. John, who was lost, asked the man if he knew how to get to the tango camp. The man turned his back to John, closed his eyes, and with a smile, began walking away, telling John to follow him since he was also heading to the tango camp for a task. John thanked him and decided to follow. As they walked, John extended his hand toward the man and asked if he was also a job changer. He was somewhat confused because the man carried his sword on his back instead of storing it in the system inventory. The man walked ahead of John and explained that he wasn't a job changer but simply an enthusiast who enjoyed practicing with the sword. He turned his head toward John, looked him in the eyes, and with a cheerful smile, explained that when he was young, he lacked talent. After failing to change jobs, he struggled for nearly 10 years and still couldn't afford to buy a bathroom in the city. At that point, he was completely desperate and ran to the mountains. There, he found a small abandoned cabin, climbed onto a table, and prepared to hang himself. But when he looked to the side, he saw a sword. Seeing the sword reignited his will to live. Since then, he had practiced with the sword every day on the mountain, drawing the sword for 20 years and fencing for 30 years. Suddenly, he had a revelation. He asked John if that didn't seem incredible. John, somewhat confused, responded that it was indeed incredible. The man grabbed his sword, looked at the ground, and asked John if he wanted to learn how to handle the sword. He knew a special move. Before he could say the name of the move, John interrupted him and refused. Hearing this, the man put away his sword, closed his eyes, and with a pleasant smile, thought that John was a bit impatient. He decided to wait for the moment when John would want to learn how to handle the sword. John looked up at the sky and, upon seeing something, couldn't help but be surprised. With a cheerful look, he asked the man to look and asked if that wasn't the tango camp. But to everyone's surprise, the man disappeared. John looked around, noticing the man was gone, and became somewhat confused. He wondered where the man had gone and thought that the old man was too strange. At the same time, in tango camp, several helicopters flew in the sky. At the entrance, there was a receptionist, and in front of the desk, a huge line of people had formed. The receptionist instructed all geniuses entering the camp to line up for registration. Each would receive an identification bracelet that couldn't be removed unless they were eliminated. A man with black hair approached the entrance. Shortly after, it was John's turn. From Chu City, he received the identification bracelet and put it on his wrist. In the camp, Mahanku and Leo Sando were also present. They brought their hands to their chests, looked at John with a loving gaze, and couldn't help but blush upon seeing that he had also come to the camp. For Mahanku, he was her master, and for Leo Sando, he was her benefactor. John felt somewhat confused, as he didn't know what was happening. Being a benefactor was fine, but being her master wasn't. The two women began to argue aggressively, insulting each other. Leo Sando didn't understand why Mahanko called Zhang love. She had advised her many times to read fewer romance novels so she wouldn't fantasize senselessly. Mahanko responded that she now knew what true love was and that Leo Sando was nothing. As the two argued, little Nine appeared. She took out a piece of watermelon, closed her eyes, and while eating it, explained to Zhang that she was enjoying watching them fight. Zhang remained silent, overwhelmed by the situation. Leo Sando pointed at little Nine and asked why she was so close to Zhang without any reason. Mahanko grabbed Zhang's arm, mocked Leo Sando, and told her to stop being narcissistic since she wasn't following him. According to her, Zhang had the final say. Zhang didn't say a word. Seeing this, Leo Sando pointed at Mahanko with a mocking smile and told her that she had said this a long time ago, and now it had come true. Mahanko touched her fingertips, looked at the ground, and explained that Zhang was very handsome. Leo Sando approached her, put a hand on her shoulder, closed her eyes, and while laughing, asked if they were good friends again. Mahanko explained that they were now better friends and rivals in love, friend-enemies. Zhang began to sweat and thought that girls were very strange. At that moment, a loud bang was heard not far from them. Everyone looked toward the sound and saw a curtain of smoke. As the smoke cleared, Zhang wondered what was happening. Leo Sando looked more closely and realized someone was fighting. The same man they had seen at the camp's entrance appeared. He rolled up his sleeves, clenched his teeth, and with an aggressive look, asked who was fighting. Not everyone had entered the camp yet, and someone was already fighting. He didn't know if this person was looking for death. Zhang, standing behind him, stared intently and realized he was the patrol instructor. He didn't know if the instructors had third-level strength. The instructor approached the fight, but someone punched him hard in the stomach, throwing his body backward. Zhang was shocked as the instructor fell to the ground, bleeding. The instructor ordered the others to notify the superiors, as the situation was getting out of hand. Leo Sando was speechless, seeing that a third-level master had been thrown into the air in a second. With a surprised look, she wondered who had hit the instructor. Mahanko revealed that they were the standouts from Zhangyan's war zone. A woman with red eyes, wearing assassin clothes, appeared. She placed her hand on her hip and stared at the instructor silently. Her name was Tanjing, the youngest assassin of Tangu. It was said she had recently assassinated a great level 4 master in Sakura country. Another man with red hair appeared, his body surrounded by powerful energy. He looked at the scene and smiled. His name was Bifong, known as the Little God of Death. He was a disciple of the chief commander of the East Sea Defense Line and was the brightest and most promising seed in the military district. However, he had psychological problems and tended to lose control easily, turning into a demon. A blue-haired man appeared, extending his sword into the sky. He stared at Zhang and smiled. His name was Zibiam, and his grandfather was one of the 7 guardians of Great Zia. He had the profession of Blue Lotus Immortal Swordsman, comparable to a divine-level profession. Leo Sando looked at Zibiam with a terrified gaze and told Zhang that she knew him. The epic sword he held had been stolen from her house. Zhang looked at him calmly and realized he was a prodigy, as his strength far surpassed that of Zhou Yuanwu. In the middle of the three stood a shirtless man with orange hair. He adopted an offensive stance and prepared to attack. As the smoke cleared, he clenched his fist tightly and decided it was time to counterattack. With a murderous look, he punched the ground, breaking it into pieces. His name was Jiang Wang, an invincible descendant with 3 unique and hidden professions. He was strangely strong, as the 3 together couldn't defeat him. Mahanko and Leo Sando looked at Jiang Wang with surprise. Even Zhang was shocked, as Jiang Wang was 3rd on the summer ranking list. He didn't know if his little insects could face him. At that moment, Zob Ban gathered momentum, jumped up, and grabbed his sword with both hands, preparing to attack. Zhang looked up and thought it wasn't good. Zob Ban landed on the ground, gripping the sword forcefully and causing the ground to crack. He was very close to Leo Sando, but Zhang grabbed her by the hip, jumped, and dodged the attack. Zob Ban stared at Jiang Wang with a serious look and praised him, as his wind fist was very powerful. Zhang caught Zob Ban's attention. Zob Ban sheathed his sword and, upon seeing Zhang, was somewhat surprised. He had heard that Zhang was the one who killed Xiao Yunu. He drew his sword again, pointed it at Zhang, and with a powerful aura surrounding him, stared intently at Zhang. Despite also despising the useless Xiao Yunu, today Zhang would die. Originally, he had planned to deal with Jiang Wang first and then take care of an ant like Zhang, but since Zhang was here, he decided to start with him. Zhang didn't let himself be intimidated. He extended his hand to the side, releasing Little Nine's poisonous mist. With determination, he told Zobban that although their strength was different, the Z family was just as rotten at its core. Zobban extended his sword to one side and began approaching Zhang. Seeing this, Zhang extended both hands to the sides and prepared to attack. Although he had promised Uncle J Gang not to show his power, there was nothing else he could do in this situation. Leo Sando, standing behind them, remained silent. Just before the combat could begin, someone launched a powerful slash toward them, splitting the ground in two. This person ordered everyone to step aside, as the Grand Instructor, known as the King of the Celestial Sword, had arrived. Seeing this, both Zhang and Zobban deactivated their powers. Zhang looked in the direction of the attack and couldn't help but wonder who the King of the Celestial Sword was. The instructor was the same person Zhang had saved from the tree earlier. He extended his sword toward them and, with a serious look, explained that if anyone dared to cause trouble before the camp started, they would have to face his sword. Zhang looked at the instructor and couldn't help but be shocked and start sweating. He couldn't believe that the strange old man he had encountered on the road was the chief instructor called the King of the Celestial Sword. With just one movement of his sword energy, he had made the four great geniuses tremble until they were immobile. Zhang didn't know if his small insects had also been destroyed by the sword's shockwave. This is the end of the video. If you want to see the next part, don't forget to subscribe and like the video.